Today's author, Bill Hayes, is the perfect antidote to what our country is going through right now. His book, Insomniac City, is a celebration of personal growth, a beautiful multicultural landscape, and a love story for the ages. This all may sound a bit cliched in our jaded landscape, but I assure you it is not. In 2009, Bill Hayes moved to New York City, and his documentation of the next 6 years through poetic description, journal entries, and everyday joys is one of the best books I've read this year. It's important that we have this event near Valentine's Day, not because it conforms to the worn-out stereotypes of what the holiday represents. To quote Charlie Kaufman, it was invented by greeting card companies to make people feel like crap. But because this book is about real love. It's the love of experience, and it's the love of having a home, whether it's in a city or in a person, and all that it gives to you. So will you please join me in welcoming Mr. Bill Hayes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for coming out on this beautiful day. On the train down from New York, I was thinking about the fact that 1 year ago, I was finishing up the first draft for this book. I had a fellowship in Rome at the American Academy in Rome, and I had about 6 weeks where I put this together in a very intensive period and literally laid it out on the walls of the studio they had given me. And I always envisioned the book as having 3 narratives. The narrative of my life in New York, my relationship with Oliver Sacks, and a kind of photographic essay chronicling my life as a street photographer. I'm going to start with the title piece, Insomniac City. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. I moved to New York 8 years ago and felt at once at home. In the haggard buildings and bloodshot skies, in trains that never stopped running, like my racing mind at night, I recognized myself, my insomniac self. If New York were a patient, it would be diagnosed with agrypnia excitata, a rare genetic condition characterized by insomnia, nervous energy, constant twitching, and dream enactment. An apt description of a city that never sleeps, a place where one comes to reinvent himself. I had brought very little with me from San Francisco, my home for 25 years, in part because I wished to leave behind any reminders of the life I'd had there, but also for more practical reasons. My new apartment was a virtual treehouse, a tiny top-floor walk-up at eye level with the ailanthus boughs. There was not room for more than a desk, a chair, a mattress, nor a need. You see, the place came furnished with spectacular views of Manhattan. What I didn't know when I rented the place was that the French restaurant located straight below my apartment had outdoor seating till 2 a.m. So lying awake in bed, I could literally hear glasses clinking and toast being made 6 stories down. This was irritating at first. But it wasn't long before I discovered a phenomenon heretofore unknown to me. Laughter rises. Hearing happy, laughing people is no cure for insomnia, but has an ameliorative effect on brokenheartedness. Sometimes I'd sit in the kitchen in the dark and gaze out at the Empire State and Chrysler buildings. Such a beautiful pair, so impeccably dressed. He in his boxy suit, every night a different hue, and she, an arm's length away, in her filigreed skirt, the color of the moon. I regarded them as an old married couple, calmly, unblinkingly, keeping watch over one of their newest sons. And I returned the favor. I would be there the moment the Empire State turned off its lights for the night, as if to get a little shut-eye before sunrise. Here's another wonder I discovered about life here. In the summertime, late into the night, some leave behind their sweat-dampened sheets to read in the coolness of a park under streetlights. Not Kindles or iPhones, but books. Newspapers, novels, poetry, completely absorbed, as if in their own worlds, as indeed they are. I had never seen anything like this until I took a shortcut through Abingdon Square Park one night while walking off my own mild agrypnia. So first, I saw an old man reading a newspaper from which someone, maybe his wife, had snipped numerous articles. It looked like a badly botched doily. I tiptoed past, as if wearing slippers, and he, as if at home in his lazy boy, did not glance up. Next, I spotted a young man reading a paperback with a distinctive brick red cover. I was pretty certain I knew what classic he had in hand, but had to make sure. So I fake dropped my keys nearby and crouched down for a better look. Just then, the young man shifted in his seat, denying me absolute proof. That's okay. I was left to imagine him imagining himself as Holden Caulfield. At the far end of the park, I found a middle-aged woman bathed in a light Vermeer would have loved, reading what looked like a textbook. Was she a teacher preparing for tomorrow's class, a student cramming last minute, or neither of these? Perhaps she was simply teaching herself. Of course, not everyone awake at this hour is an insomniac. The city is alive with doormen, delivery boys on bikes, street sweepers, homeless people, hustlers, prep cooks popping up out of trapdoors in the sidewalk. I make a point of waving or nodding hello when I can. I've come to believe that kindness is repaid in unexpected ways, and that if you are lonely or bone-tired or blue, you need only come down from your perch and step outside. New York, which is to say New Yorkers, will take care of you. One night, I was walking down Hudson Street on my way home from a friend's when I spotted a dollar bill on the sidewalk. Now, even at my age, such a find seemed magical. Free money. I leaned down to pick it up just as a woman opposite me was doing the exact same thing. $1, I heard her murmur. And our heads practically bumped. We both laughed. I happened to reach it first, but it seemed ungentlemanly to take it. Here, it's yours, I said, offering it to the woman. No, it's yours. You got it first, she said. No, I insist you take it. But by this point, she was walking away, arm in arm with a handsome man. She already had her prize. Suddenly, inspiration struck. I'm going to leave it for someone else, I called back to her. Perfect, she said over her shoulder. Have a good night. So I dropped the dollar bill back onto the sidewalk. It was liberating to throw money away, or more accurately, throw it to the fates, as I had with my life by moving to New York at age 48. So I walked a few steps, and I kid you not, I hid behind a tree to watch what would happen. I really did. One couple passed by without noticing the dollar, then another, and another. Finally, a man about my age came walking in my direction, hunched shoulders, troubled look, pulling on a cigarette, definitely an insomniac. I thought, I want you to have it. It's yours. You deserve it. From my secluded vantage point, I watched as the fellow spotted the dollar. He stopped, looked around to see if anyone was in the vicinity. Perhaps someone in front of him had dropped it. But no, the sidewalk was empty. He picked up the dollar and pocketed it with a small smile, then went on his way, as did I, back to my treehouse. Thank you. As I said, the book is a chronicle of my life in New York, but also my relationship with Oliver Sacks. And that story is told primarily through journal entries. I started a journal when I moved to New York. So I'm going to read to you some of the Oliver story. And when I get to the journal, you'll find that because I was keeping a diary and at the outset I wasn't thinking about writing a book, I just had my own shorthand. And so for the word Oliver, I would always just write O. which is what I also called him in daily life often too. So the O is Oliver. But I'm going to start with a little introduction which answers a question I get asked more than any other question, especially now, and that is, how did you meet Oliver Sacks? So this is called O and I. He wrote me a letter. That's how we met. He had read my book, The Anatomist, in proof and enjoyed it. I meant to provide a blurb, but got distracted and forgot, he said, an admission I found charming. This was when I was still living in San Francisco in early 2008. This was when people still wrote letters regularly, which was not really that long ago. And when one got a letter, sat down and wrote a letter back. Dear Mr. Hayes, dear Dr. Sacks. Thus a correspondence between O and me began. My decision to move to New York more than a year later had nothing to do with Oliver, and I did not have a relationship in mind. I'd simply reached a point in my life where I had to get away from San Francisco, my home for the past 25 years, and at age 48, start fresh. But once I moved here, in the spring of 2009, O and I started spending time together and quickly got better and better acquainted. Notes from a journal. May 9th, 2009. O says I must keep a journal, and so I must. I make notes on scraps of paper, the backs of envelopes, cocktail napkins, sometimes dated, sometimes not. June 17th, 2009. Are you seeing anyone? Someone asks. Only New York, I answer. But this is not 100% true. O isn't comfortable with anyone knowing about us and gets palpably nervous if we're out together and see someone he knows. February 1st, 2010. A languid Sunday. Afternoon turning into evening, evening into night, night to morning. I just want to enjoy your nextness and nearness, O says. He puts his ear to my chest and listens to my heart and counts the beat. 62, he says with a satisfied smile. And I can't imagine anything more intimate. August 17th, 2010. I stopped by O's to bring him an ice cream bar. I mentioned I saw fireflies in Abingdon Square Park. Fireflies. Oh, did you keep your mouth shut? What do you mean keep my mouth shut? Oh, they say 3 will kill you. Luciferase. Dangerous stuff, Billy. I'm laughing, but he is not. I really cannot tell if he's serious. I don't want you to die of fireflies. A luminous death. August 26th, 2011. We are at the Brazilian restaurant in our neighborhood when O suddenly asks, have you ever felt that a part of your body was not yours? I laugh. This is why I love you, Oliver. He smiles. Well, a part of my body not mine. I'm not sure. I don't think so. If one did, one would know, O responds dryly. After eating, we rushed back to his apartment to listen to a live broadcast of Mozart's Requiem on the radio, or what we thought would be. It was Schubert instead. But Schubert, so romantic and grand. Lying on the bed in the dark, listening to his 8th Symphony in our underwear. The radio announcer says that Schubert died at 31. O turns to me. Do you think it makes it easier to die young, knowing that you have already created enough masterpieces for a lifetime? No, I say. No, I don't. September 15th, 2011, 7:15 p.m. O on the phone without even saying hello. Billy, shouldn't one be on the roof? The sun is setting. I, yes, one should. O, I will meet you there. I will bring a bottle. January 1st, 2012. Just before midnight, I taught O how to open a bottle of champagne, something he had never done before. So sweet to see the joy and surprise and fear on his face as pop, the cork exploded. He had insisted on wearing his swimming goggles, though, just in case. March 17th, 2012. Oh, I don't know if a passion for symmetry is also an intolerance of asymmetry. Do you? I think one can be passionate about both. I think one can embody both. Oh, good. Very good. Before we were involved, Oliver had never been in a romantic or domestic relationship in his 76 years. But he dove into it head first, wearing swimming goggles sometimes. And one thing he and I loved was making dinner together. So we'd come together each night and make dinner. And there were so many instances in my journal of our dinner episodes that it was hard to pick, just one or two to include in the book. But this was one that I thought was especially typical. April 7th, 2012. A not untypical dinner. O snipped the ends off the string beans with his cuticle scissors, quaffing them for the steam. I trimmed the broccoli. We shared a gigantic carrot, passing it back and forth between us while having some of O's specially mixed tea, a blend of smoky Lapsang Souchang and brisk Darjeeling. We left the salmon to marinate. I read the paper. O went into the bedroom and did 55 of his signature crunches, exhaling on the first, then holding it 5 seconds on the second. O likes things to be in fives. I grilled the salmon atop the stove, 5 minutes each side, and made some toast from leftover challah bread. I opened a bottle of wine. I was feeling blue. I didn't know why. To divert me, cheer me, O told me a story of a Tourette's patient who was a surgeon and would smoke while exercising every morning. This made me laugh. I hadn't heard it before. So after eating, O got up and found the story in his book, An Anthropologist on Mars, his large print edition. And as I lay on the couch, he sat at the table, read the entire story from start to finish in the most animated voice, lavishly drawing out the more unusual words. I peeked over the couch a few times to watch him reading, the book just a couple of inches from his face. It's amazing he can read at all. He's so nearly completely blind. I clapped when he came to the end. We returned to the kitchen. His wine was too sour, so he added a packet of artificial sweetener to it. Much better. And drank it down. We talked about this and that, and then I said I needed to go to bed. He absent-mindedly reached for the bottle of port, uncorked it, and took a swig. Nothing like port, he murmured. Next morning, O reported to me that he'd had a dream in which he was at a charming little cafe in the shadow of 2 giant oversized mushrooms. On the menu, 2 kinds of fern salad and a carrot salad with 7,217 different carrots. He'd drawn the number and a picture of the mushrooms on the kitchen whiteboard when he woke in the middle of the night. October 16th, 2013. I, soaking in the bath, O, on the toilet, talking about what he's been thinking and writing, short personal pieces, for a memoir, perhaps. He had brought with him 2 pillows to sit on and a very large red apple. He opens his mouth wide and takes a gigantic bite. I watch him chewing for quite a while. After he finally finishes, I say, "Bite me off a piece." He does so, dislodges the apple from his mouth and puts the piece in my mouth. We keep talking. I add more hot water. Every other bite he gives to me. There's a quiet moment, and then, seemingly apropos of nothing, O says, "I'm glad to be on planet Earth with you. It would be so much lonelier otherwise." I reach for his hand and hold it. "I too," I say. September 20th, 2014. "Do you sometimes catch yourself thinking," says O, out of the blue, in the car on the way to his place in the country, "I sometimes sort of feel like I'm looking at the neural basis of consciousness," he says. "Yeah?" I'm just trying to drive. "Those are special occasions," he went on, "when the mind takes off and you can watch it. It's largely autonomous, but autonomous on your behalf, in regard to problems, questions, and so on." He pauses, then returns to his thought. "These are creative flights. Flights. Nice word, flights." I say, "I love that word. What triggers such flights for you, Oliver?" "Surprise, astonishment, wonder." The book is filled with stories about Oliver Sacks, but also with stories of my neighbors and strangers I meet on the streets of New York, some of whom I take photographs of. And the last piece I'm going to read is about one of my favorite New Yorkers who happens to be my neighbor and the manager of the smoke shop down the street. And I hadn't planned this at the outset, but as it turns out, this is Ali. His name is Ali. He becomes a recurring character in my book because I visit the smoke shop so often just to say hello and hang out and eavesdrop on conversations. And so he appears now and then throughout Insomniac City. But this is his first appearance. It's called Lessons from the Smoke Shop. My 30-year-long subscription to The New Yorker ran out. Pure absent-mindedness on my part. And since then, I've been buying a copy each week at the smoke shop around the corner from our building. It makes no sense financially. I could save 73% off the cover price if I were just to renew for a year, even more for 2. But I've found I enjoy the benefits that come with my $6.99 a week, beginning with Ali, the shop's manager. Ali had formerly known me as a customer who occasionally came in late at night for a single vanilla Haagen-Dazs ice cream bar and asked for a book of matches. The asking part is important. He once told me about a customer who reached over the counter and grabbed a book of matches from the box next to the cash register. "No, you don't do that," I tell him, Ali recounted, still bristling. "That is wrong. You don't go reaching across like that without permission. You ask, I will give you a book of matches." Ali paused and looked at me. "Not everyone gets one." Remember that. "Maybe they look like nothing special, Ali's matches. They're just a generic white and have thank you printed on them." I kind of half reached for one just to mess with him. He held up a warning figure and tried to look stern, then selected a book of thank you matches from the box as deliberately as if he were making a chess move. "Here, go with your matches and your ice cream," he said. "Thank you, Ali, thank you. You're welcome, my friend." Here's another thing I've learned from hanging out in Ali's shop. There's no haggling here. Now, this may seem obvious, but apparently it's not. Not to everyone. I went in last Friday night to buy my New Yorker, and while browsing the magazines, saw a tall, imposingly built young man try to haggle with him over the price of a single cigarillo. Single cigarillos and cigarettes being for sale here. He fished in his pockets and spilled pennies on the counter. Come on, man. You might have thought he had insulted Ali's grandmother. Ali sent that young man on his way. What, they think I'm going to bargain with them just because I have an accent? He said to no one in particular, in his best indignant voice. Then he laughed. I did too. The store is called a smoke shop, but let's face it, it's a head shop. Hundreds of pipes and bongs line the shelves. There are rolling papers, booze, condoms, lubes, pseudo-poppers, lotto tickets, junk food, you name it. It's so full of vices that paradoxically, it's a vice-free zone. I hardly ever indulged in potato chips before, but that's changed since I started buying my New Yorker there. I threw in a bag of salt and vinegar ones this time. What the hell? $8, he said. $8, my friend. I pulled the bills from my wallet while doing the math in my head, and suddenly it hit me. It's always right on the dollar, Ali, isn't it? $8, not $7.98, or $3, not $2.95 with tax or whatever. Ali smiled. I rounded off. Less change. It's good. Ali kept the shop open during Hurricane Sandy, as unfazed by the storm as he is by the crazies he sometimes contends with on weekends. I went in on the second night of no power, no lights or water, went with Oliver. The shop counter was lit like an altar with a few well-placed candles. Ali looked like an oracle. In the semi-darkness, one would never have known there's a ton of porn for sale in the back. Gay, straight, everything in between and at every extreme. We bought water and a flashlight and chatted for a little while. He told us when to come back if we needed more. He had a bottled water connection of some sort. It felt nice to emerge from our dark, trapped apartments and connect with the formerly normal. We then stopped into the bar next door and had a warm beer by candlelight and toasted with fellow neighborhood drinkers to surviving Sandy and to being New Yorkers. Now, even under normal circumstances, one would never find Ali in that bar, say, having a drink at the end of a night. In fact, Ali would never partake of almost anything for sale in his own shop. I don't touch any of it, he has told me. I don't do any of it. I drink Sprite. I go home to my family in Queens. Even so, he doesn't seem to pass judgment on those who partake. Or if he does, he's got quite a poker face. I think he gets that some of us may need a little something extra to distract us, to take the edge off, to gamble on the remote chance that we might win big in the lottery and get to leave this place. I've lived in New York long enough now to understand why some people hate it here. The crowds, the noise, the traffic, the expense, the rents, the messed up sidewalks and pothole-pocked streets, the weather that brings hurricanes named after girls that break your heart and take everything. It requires a certain kind of unconditional love to love living in New York. But New York repays you in time in memorable encounters at the very least. Just remember, ask first, don't grab, be fair, say please and thank you. Always say thank you. Even if you don't get something back right away, you will. Thank you so much. Happy to take questions, and I hear there's a microphone.
Do you love New York?
Do I love New York? Absolutely. I love New York unabashedly.
If you guys could please ask your questions into the mic, thank you.
I'll ask a question.
All right.
In doing any kind of, like autobiographical writing or memoir, is it weird to kind of impose a structure on your life and your experiences and kind of going through the process of, I mean, I'm sure you had an editor help you, but is that a strange thing to do?
Well, this is my 4th book, and all 4 of my books and all of the essays I've published in the New York Times and elsewhere often have been memoir or have a personal narrative. I think there's something about it that there's a way to sort of unify what has happened in your life and find meaning in it. This book, though, I wanted the reader to experience what my life has been like in New York City. So it's deliberately made up of all different strands and jumps from fairly straight narrative to journal entries to photographs. And I really wanted the photographs themselves to appear in the same way in which they were taken on the street. So the photos in the book Insomniac City don't necessarily come with stories or descriptions or explanations. They just appear, almost like a stranger passing in the street. And that is exactly how I took them, too. I see someone tracks my eye for one reason or another, someone interesting, and I approach them and ask if I can take their picture. And more often than not, they say yes. But I wanted the experience of reading the book to somehow be sort of like what my life has been like in New York.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
I just want to ask, so my brother actually just moved with his boyfriend from San Francisco to New York. Do you have any particular advice for someone like that? He's 27, just moved, like specifically from San Francisco as well, and kind of that transition, I guess, between those two places.
Advice for someone moving from San Francisco to New York. One of the things that took me most by surprise that one cannot be prepared for is how extreme the weather can be. Because I lived in San Francisco 25 years. It's quite moderate, and I had grown up on the West Coast. But in New York, the weather can be so extreme, so hot and so humid in the summertime. And if you don't have good air conditioning, that can be miserable. Or so incredibly cold in the winter, and I had to completely outfit myself that first winter in New York with boots and big coat and all that stuff. So that's one thing. Be prepared for that. Go ahead.
I've been a decades-long fan of Oliver Sacks, and I'm sure you hear this at all your book talks. And I guess I don't know how it feels to be writing a book that you've written and have a lot of people focus on your subject instead of you, maybe. But I was wondering, he was such a fabulous, wonderful person and writer and thinker. Was your relationship ever one of student-teacher, or was it always companions and friends and lovers?
Well, first of all, to answer the first part of it, I'm really happy to have captured Oliver Sacks in this book in a way that most people didn't know him, because he had such an endearing, quirky side. And
but those of us who read him did know that side of him, because that's what he conveyed in all his books.
Yeah.
Charm. Total charm, yeah.
Was the relationship student-teacher? Well, it went both ways. There was indeed a 30-year age difference. There's a ton that I learned from him. He was beyond knowledgeable in his own field, but also about botany, musical history, so many things. But there were a lot of things he didn't know too, especially about relationships. And that's something I knew something about. So there was teaching that went both ways. And just really easy companionship. That's the loveliest part of our life. And that I think I try to capture in the book. The day-to-day. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I remember him writing about this thing called prosopagnosia.
Right.
And did he really not recognize your face when he saw you, or was that?
He did have a condition called prosopagnosia, which is also known as face blindness.
Yeah.
So he really did have trouble recognizing people. Like within our own building, he could ride the elevator with the same neighbors all the time and not put the name to the face.
What about with you?
With me, no, he knew me, and there were other ways that he could recognize people he knew well, by voice or by gesture or body shape, or it wasn't complete blindness. It was sort of like partial facial blindness. But I did have one funny instance where I saw his prosopagnosia in action at the gym. We both went to the same gym, but sometimes at different times. And I was getting dressed, I think, and there's Oliver, like, across the way. And I see him very kindly talking to this man about my age who, like me, was balding and about my build. And I could see that something had taken place. And the man looked very confused. And then Oliver trotted on his way with his cane. And I asked him about it later, and he said, "Oh, yes, I bumped into someone. I thought it was you." So that could happen.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
Well, first, I think your writing is beautiful,
Oh, thank you.
and you really speak to heart and soul. I'm an insomniac, and I love it. And I'm going to ask you, I embrace the upness of
Good.
it. Are you
The upside of insomnia.
Well, that's what I was going to ask
Yeah.
you, because sleep is kind of like a waste, or there's stuff to do. How do you feel about it? Are you still an insomniac? And how do you handle it?
I think once an insomniac, always an insomniac.
Right.
I've had trouble sleeping since I was a little boy. I'm now 56. It does not stress me out like it used to when I was in my 20s and 30s. My first book is called Sleep Demons. It's a memoir about insomnia, woven together with the history of sleep science. That's how obsessed I was with insomnia and sleep. I think just with time, it's not become something I stress out about as much. I'll probably never be a really good sleeper. I still marvel at people on airplanes who next to me fall asleep, even on long flights. I just don't know how people do that. And yet, in my old age, I'm almost able to take a nap sometimes. So that's progress. One also learns that it doesn't kill you.
No.
If you don't sleep well, it's a drag, but it doesn't kill you. So take advantage of it.
I was wondering, I read On the Move by Dr. Sachs, and he acknowledged his gayness late in life. And you mentioned that sometimes he was uncertain about being with you. Did you help him come out? How did you feel about his uneasiness of acknowledging his gayness?
That comes out more in the book, in Insomniac City. It was indeed a struggle at first, because I was someone who'd been out since I was 24. I came out right after college. I'd lived my life out. I'd written about being gay. I'd had a long-term partner. So I'd sort of had a personal and a public life as a gay person. And then to get involved with someone who was not, who'd lived so privately, there were some struggles at first, because it was hard for him just to even be together in public. There's a phrase I use in the book where I talk about, Oliver's talking about his hero Darwin and about the concept of accelerated evolution. And he's giving me an example of a certain type of bird in the industrial age in England who very quickly accelerated its feathers to sort of camouflage in the sky. Anyway, I saw in Oliver an instance of accelerated evolution where it was a little bit of a struggle at first, but he very quickly became comfortable being with me, and he fell in love. And that's a great way to sort of deal with that. But I didn't, at the same time, I didn't push him to come out. I let him just at his own pace. And the fact is, he didn't speak or write about it publicly until his memoir was published in May 2015, which is only 3 months before his death. So before that time, he had never spoken or written about the fact that he was gay, ever. And as you can imagine, he was a public figure and asked about his romantic life or personal life many, many times, and he would always defer. He would just not talk about that part of his life. But that changed at the end.
Right. And did his close friends know he was gay, or?
I suppose. But the truth is, Oliver Sacks lived an almost monk-like life, devoted to his patients, to his work, to writing, to reading, and to thinking. And literally would eat sardines over the kitchen sink. That was his dinner. So it wasn't so much even a part of his identity. And then, to his own surprise, he fell in love.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. You made just a couple of mentions about his extended family in the book.
Uh-huh.
What, if any, relationship do you have
With Oliver's family?
Mhm.
Well, his immediate family is gone. He had 3 brothers who all died before him.
Okay.
But he does have nieces and nephews. Most of them are in London, and then they have children. So there is some extended family, and I'm close with them.
Okay. Cool.
Mm-hmm. Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
My question is, do you find it hard writing about topics that you don't have an educational background in? And if you do, how do you establish credibility with that, and how do you conquer that and move forward?
He asked if you couldn't hear if I had trouble writing about topics that I'm not trained in, or yeah, it's difficult. And my 3 previous books all deal with subjects that I really knew nothing about. I don't have a medical background. I'm not trained as a scientist or a doctor. And I approach the books as a layperson, or the subjects, and teach myself. So when it came to the first book, really doing research and teaching myself about the history of sleep science, or my book on human blood, just delving into that history and that science. And for my last book, which is called The Anatomist, I spent a year studying anatomy alongside med students, basically auditing anatomy classes and learning it that way. So, and I think in a certain way, the same is true of my photography. I bought a camera 10 years ago and started taking pictures, but I've never taken a class. And I've just taught myself through doing it and through mistakes. Hi.
Hi. I just want to compliment the book design.
Thank you.
What is this photograph of?
I'm glad you pointed that out. This book was designed by the art director at Bloomsbury, who did such a beautiful job. And if you just slip off the jacket, there's a color photograph taken right outside my apartment window. So that's outside my apartment in New York. And yeah, she did a really beautiful job designing the whole book.
Are you standing on the roof to take this picture?
No, I'm at my window and just looking like out my window at like 2 a.m.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any more questions? Hi.
So earlier you mentioned that Dr. Sachs told you to journal. And I'm curious if you'd just reflect a little for us on what that's given you. And did the process surprise you in any way, what you've learned?
I'm so glad you asked about the journal. Yeah, just maybe 2 weeks after I arrived in New York, and I had already met Oliver, he said to me, "You must keep a journal." And I began keeping a journal. And he kept journals, as many of you probably know. He, as Hallie, who worked for Oliver, knows, would go through journals every month. I kept journals in a more haphazard way. I continued to write notes on scraps of paper and backs of envelopes and pieces of paper and shove them into a drawer. And sometimes maybe someone would give me a journal as a gift, and I'd fill that. And then another one, and then I'd start one on a laptop. And when that laptop died, I'd start on the next laptop. I tell you all of that because in the run-up to writing this book, I spent about 3 months compiling all those notes and compiling the different journals I'd kept into one file. And then I had it printed out, and honestly, to my surprise, it was 750 pages long. And I would never have guessed that. So I had it, put it into a 3-ring binder, and I took that with me to Rome, where I had this fellowship for 6 weeks. And I really didn't know how I was going to write this book, how I would write about Oliver Sacks, or even if I would write about Oliver, because that wasn't even a given. I knew I wanted to write about New York. But I began, my first week in Rome, I spent just reading through this journal. The first entry was, O says I must keep a journal. And it had continued on through his death. and after his death. And I got a highlighter, a yellow highlighter pen, and began highlighting passages that just jumped out at me. And that was the epiphany for this book. I realized that the stories were right there and that they didn't need setup and they didn't need explanation. There didn't have to be a lot of exposition, that I could actually just use the journal entries themselves and that they would tell the story of Oliver and me, and sometimes the stories of characters I met on the street. So one thing also that I wanted deliberately to do with this book was to leave space in between entries. You'll notice that sometimes weeks or months go by in between entries. And that's not because I wasn't writing. Partly it was just a literary choice or an editorial choice just to pick the very best, most compressed, vivid entries. But I also wanted to give the reader the sense of time passing and let the reader imagine what is his life like in those days and weeks in between, and leave some space for imagination and not try to tell everything, just to show. Mm-hmm. I thought that was a question. Any other questions? Thank you all for coming. Oh, go ahead. Were there any themes that went out? One thing that surprised me, and actually it didn't hit me until the book was done, like when I got a finished copy and I read through it, and I saw how often Oliver and I would discuss the concept of pleasure. That he's constantly bringing up this question of pleasure and sort of interrogating it and analyzing it in his very Oliver Sacksian way. Not that he hadn't had pleasure in his life, but there was a whole new level of pleasure in all different ways, just by sharing his life with another person, making dinner together. He loved domestic life. It was like he discovered it for the first time. He had a very nice apartment, but he was completely unacquainted with his microwave, his dishwasher, the washing machine. I mean, completely, because he had a housekeeper who would come in once a week and make tabbouleh and, make things that he could eat. And she would do the dishes. Like, she would load the dishwasher once a week and then unload them the next week. So when he and I got together, and I had been in relationships before, and it was just natural to me that I would buy food and we would make dinner, and I would say, Oliver, you chop the vegetables and you snip the broccoli or whatever. And he loved it. And he was very good at chopping. I have to say, he was a very good chopper, but he did also have a fear of knives. He really believed that knives were, he really believed they were out to cut him. But he fell in love with the dishwasher. He loved to load the dishwasher. As I say in the book, if the dishwasher wasn't completely full, he would take clean cups and glasses out of the cupboard and plates. Oh, yes, because he just said one thinks they want to be cleaned and have company. He became very good at using the microwave and knowing exactly how many seconds something should be warmed. Hallie knows this. So if a cup of tea was not hot enough, he would say 12 seconds. And you bring it back and it'd be like 3 more seconds. And then it would be exactly right. And he introduced me to the concept of putting fruit into salads. So he loved to be very imaginative with putting fruit into salads. And that I went along with until he came to bananas. Like putting bananas into a green salad, I couldn't do that. But so that was so back to your question. A theme was pleasure. And you'll find there are a number of conversations we have where he's sort of interrogating the idea of pleasure. Can one have 2 pleasures at the same time, he asks? Or does pleasure always have to be attached to an object? Or can pleasure be something that is conceived and felt on its own? Thank you. I'm happy to sign books, and thank you all for coming.